Today, my presentation is on the universality of personality. Is diversity and inclusion necessary? My name is Beverly Vandiver, and I'm a professor of human sciences in the program of human development and family sciences at The Ohio State University. Get this to work. I have two objectives today. The first part of the title is to highlight the current state of research on the universality of personality. And the second part of the title is diversity and inclusion necessary, the second objective. About me, I'm not a personality psychologist. I'm a counseling psychologist by training. I focus on research methodology, especially on measurement of cultural issues, specifically Black racial identity. Context matters to me. I was born and raised at the foothills of Appalachian, Kentucky. Ancestry reflects a multicultural background. I was raised and identified as a Black African American. My parents were farmers, raised tobacco, and purebred hogs. It is not a typical story that you hear about someone of my background. What about me? My background has informed who I've been, am, and will be, and especially personality and style of relating. Context and culture are the foundation of personality, and most people will not disagree with that, because I know personality takes a contextual or situational point of view. And so it's not a surprise that personality is enacted in a culture. What is a personality? My general definition is that it's a consistent characteristics of an individual based on patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Traits are the descriptors used to describe the characteristics of the personality, and they also convey consistency and stability of these characteristics. The focus is on individual differences. Is personality universal? It's a yes and no answer. The basis for a universal personality has been the Big Five, or a five-factor model. And these are the ones that people know: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. And then, of course, these factors are supported by a number of lower traits that are within each. The essence of the model dates back to various work, such as Allport and Odbert. But then, fast forward and you see the work of McCrae and Costa that has continued to this day. The initial focus was on the variation of personality description in the English language. Since the 90s, the focus has expanded to the cross-cultural replicability of the model. If replicable across languages and cultures, it provides support for its validity as a universal model of personality. The research to date is based upon personality questionnaires, psycholexical studies, and emic and etic studies. And if you look at the questionnaire studies based upon the FFM across at least 50 cultures or more and translations, the commentary has been fair to very good replicability of the factors of the FFM in individual cultures and for the total set of cultures compared with US structure. So basically they have found a general structure, but variation in prevalence. And some examples that I point here are by Schmidt et al., McCrae et al., and Gervin et al. And so they find that Schmidt found in parts of East Asia that there were average level of extroversion was lower in East Asia than other regions. And then you have in Africa, there are variations with the factor of openness, as well as in parts of Asia. McCrae reported a lower congruence in African countries, especially for openness, and that extroversion was defined by a number of factors or facets from other factors. Challenges: no comparable support for measurement equivalence. There's some evidence of inequivalence, and the question is whether individual differences have the same meaning across countries. So the other challenge is that questionnaires require a level of literacy of the population. And Gervin et al. Found no replication of the FFM with specific ethnic farmers in the Bolivian Amazon. In regard to the psycholexical studies, most important features are contained in the single terms used across languages. And Goldberg sort of kicked this research off in English, but since that time, there have been at least 15 studies that have looked at Indo-European and non-Indo-European languages. What they have found that there's been no convergence on a replicable model across languages. They have found some replicability in the Germanic languages. They found 3 of the factors that were replicable, Derad et al., across languages: extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. But even these were broadly defined and included terms from other factors. There was less agreement about the other 2, neuroticism and openness. The challenge in terms of doing psycholexical studies is trying to create a balance between the parsimony and the comprehensiveness or the inclusive across these languages. You want to find some of the broadest terms to capture the similarities, but there are so many differences and nuances. You want to be able to have a large enough pool of terms to be able to capture that as well. And then there are issues regarding the cultural premise or the conceptual premise of psycholexical approach, because you have to deal with this balance of the frequency of terms and then how informative the trait terms are. And of course, there are variations between or across common written language and spoken dialect. And the example that's given is Arabic. And of course, if you have no lexicography, then it's hard to do a psycholexical study. The emic or etic approach, and we've talked about even in the first 2 areas, the emic approach, looking for this generalizability, where the etic approach focus on unique aspects of personality in non-Western culture. And they're allowed to use a wide variety of methodologies because they're not bound by one approach. And some of the examples that I found were in the Philippines, Mexico, and China. There were many, many more. I just sort of selected the first 3. And they found most personality dimensions identified could be subsumed under the FFM. The same that was found in Mexico. So they were able to sort of conclude that the cultural differences may not be reflected in identification of a dimension, but that there are some nuances such as the salience or the importance or how this factor is composed. China, using one of their own measures developed in China, found there was one dimension not subsumed within FFN, and this was called interpersonal relatedness, where it examined or tapped into the social context and adherence to tradition. Now, this dimension has emerged in non-Chinese populations, including the United States. But what is interesting is that openness is not used in their measures, but when researchers used the traditional measures, like from the United States, in China, openness popped up. So it's interesting about this idea of structuring how people need to respond versus something that is developed indigenously and gets a different response. So basically, my answer to the question, is personality universal? Is primarily yes, when examine it from a Western perspective. And so it's not a criticism. It is just a lot of questions that I ask. Why was the Big Five or FMI set as the reference for universality? Sometimes things need to be reversed. Why not look for common features across major cultures and countries, come up with a independent format or content and measure that? Because the use of measures developed from a Western view structure the responses. The no is that meaning and use needs to be examined. Words have so many meanings and uses across the world. What looks like a duck may not necessarily walk or quack like a duck. And so we still do not know or understand some of these nuances. Does culture matter in personality research? Absolutely. And the questions of the how is varied. And so I really can't tell you all of the how, except for I can say that personality may evidence universal patterns. But the question is whether universal patterns evidence itself in the same way in all cultures. And so we know that the essence of culture, just like personality, is reflected in how people act, think, and feel. And the examples that I think about when I've taught classes on culture is that all societies have talk about some kind of family, talk about some kind of work, talk about some kind of learning or education, and talk about religion. And yet, as you dig into those or examine these features in these cultures, you begin to see there's some similarities across cultures, but that there are nuances in what a family looks like. So the example is that we have an emphasis on a nuclear family in the United States. There are other cultures have extended family. When we think about the world of work, people describe us as being pretty frenetic and paced and intense about work in the United States, but yet in Spain, they take a siesta every day. And the same thing goes about religion, going from groups that their religion is based on a philosophy of life, such as in China or in India, where in the United States, it's a different kind of formal structure. So it's important to know that, yes, every culture sort of would support the essence of a personality. And in many cases that it may show or evidence universal aspects. However, culture does contextualize and sort of enhance or decrease different aspects of personality and their traits. And there are times that personality does not always intersect with culture as would be expected. So, for example, in a study that I did in 2002, when I was validating the cross-racial identity scale, one of the theoretical premises of the expanded negrescence model, which is the model is about the formation of attitudes about race based on social reference group, is that personality features are not equal to racial identity. Racial identity was not ever designed to reflect personality. There are times that they may converge, but most of the time, racial identity is a social identity. It's attitudinal. To test this premise, we used the BFI and correlated it with the 6 subscales of the CRISP. And I've just sort of given you a broad look regarding the correlations of the Big Five to the 6 subscales of the CRISP. And I just put in absolute terms But what I thought was interesting was that the correlation barely got up to about 0.21, about 4%. And none of these were considered statistically significant because we were using an effect size of 0.30 for convergent validity at least. And, of course, anything lower for discriminant. So, we have an evidence of discriminant validity for the most part that the big five and the racial identity constructs as we measure them are not reflecting the same construct. And I just sort of put on each end of the correlation coefficient, the minimum and maximum, which variable was correlating with the big five. So does diversity matter in personality research and community? Yes, it does. And I don't know whether anybody would disagree with that. Diversity matters. And it matters more than about demographics such as race, gender, sexual orientation, or even SES. Diversity is about inclusion. And so you need to have inclusion in pursuit of knowledge and its applicability to all. It's about use of multiple lenses to understand personality. My contention is not possible for one specific group of people, whether you're talking about white males or Black females or people of Asian descent, to establish knowledge for all. Unfortunately, that has been the history of most psychological disciplines, but the past should not be the prologue for the future. That when you allowing or it's set up to promote the views of one group of people, you will have an inevitable skew and bias in knowledge formation based upon the experience or the lack thereof. And so it is always important to have more people at the table, even when people disagree about methodology, about lens. Those issues can get worked out through what I would be hoping is a scholarly engagement and discussion. So for personality psychologists to truly want the discipline to expand knowledge and understanding of all, they need to expand the inclusion of others into the discipline, locally and internationally. And maybe this is not an issue internationally, but I suspect it may be locally. You need to question what is normative about the field, the people, and the focus. And that is the biggest challenge that I have about the Big Five research. I think it's an interesting set of research for a Western US-based field. And I applaud people for wanting to make it cross-cultural, but I think sometimes it is important to start anew and from a different angle and not use the US and what we have found as the normative base. I think we need to partner with others on research that are different from ourselves to expand the lens and understanding of personality. And these things I know require change, and change is difficult because everyone works best when the setting is known and comfortable. But comfort and being predictable do not move a field forward. Innovation and inclusion have been the stimuli to move any discipline forward. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Good day.